There's nothing better than finding an author that you know's style just works for you. So much so is when they release a new book, you're like, yep, don't even need to know anything about it. I'm sold, I want it, give me it now. I will read it. So today I thought I would go over some of my auto-buy authors. Starting with oh boy, Kristoff. Now I actually picked up Nevernight a number of years ago and I didn't like it. I read the first couple chapters and it was just too much. And he has a very distinct prose style, and I think earlier on I just wasn't used to the more purple, flowery, metaphorical writing. However, as I got more into the genre and I dabbled more in that style, I went back to it and I had a really good time with Nevernight. And then I picked up Empire of the Vampire, and if you've been following this channel for any length of time, you know that I loved this book. And while these two series are very different, there is some stylistic choices and different markers in both series and in some of his other work that I think is just undeniably Kristoff, and I love them so much that I know if he writes a completely new series, I'm definitely going to be checking it out. And I do think that one of those markers is that prose style. He writes beautifully, he's very metaphorical and rather purple, but I do think that Empire of the Vampire is slightly less metaphorical, but still very much beautifully written. Another marker is his character work. I love that both his main characters across these two series are badasses. Mia is this young girl who's becoming an assassin, whereas Gabriel is this silver saint, this sort of brotherhood that are dedicated to killing vampires, and he's also a badass. But they are also both very snarky characters. The humor in it works really well for me personally. And I also want to note that his world building is always very in-depth. It's not the same as Sanderson in that we get explanations for everything, but there's this sort of iceberg effect with how he creates his world, where you feel like there is this incredible depth because you're just getting given so many small little details that brings his worlds to life. Next on up, we have Rob J. Hayes, the author of the War Eternal series, as well as a bunch of others. And I'm not going to hold this up for the whole clip, but Rob is probably better known for his Mortal Techniques series, starting with, well, they're all standalones, but the first one released was Never Die, which, just as a side note, Broken Binding are doing a special edition of, and it is absolutely stunning. I've ordered my copy and I cannot wait for it to come in the mail. I believe that they do have some stock left, so I will leave a link in the description below. However, stock is very limited. If you do want one, I highly recommend getting one soon. And when I started to read Rob J. Hayes' work, I was looking for an audiobook at the time, and I thought I don't want to get the audiobook for Never Die because I know I'm going to want the physical copy for that, because it's his biggest work, it's probably one of his best works. It's the one that everybody talks about, so I'm going to want it for the shelf. So I thought I'll check out the audiobook for Along the Razor's Edge. It's not a series that I hear about talked about that often, so I thought, okay, maybe I'll just get to listen to that entire series through the audiobook and I wouldn't need to pick up the physicals afterwards. However, as you can see, that failed miserably. I enjoyed this series so much that I ended up getting the hard copies, and the audiobooks are amazing, so I listened to the entire series on audiobook and then grabbed the hard copies as well because they are absolutely stunning, and I love this series so much. And what makes this series so good is the character of Eska. How Rob really delves into her as an individual and really delves into her struggles and her personality, and she's such a strong character. Because you are so close to Eska as a character, this book is in first person, you really get to see her values and what she stands for, which creates so many brilliant passages and just one-off lines that you could just pull out because they're so almost philosophical in the way that it is written. So of course I'm super amped for his God Eater series that he's been working on for years now, that is this concurrent trilogy of trilogies, which means he's releasing 3 book 1s at the same time, and then the second lot of book 2s all at one time, and then book 3s. So there's going to be 9 books, and they take across 3 different timelines. It sounds insane, and I am so looking forward to checking it out. Next on up, probably an author that is not a surprise to anybody, but the Mistborn trilogy, Brandon Sanderson is definitely an auto-buy author of mine. The Mistborn trilogy in particular were the books that got me into adult fantasy. They're the ones that I picked up first when I was getting back into reading back in 2020, and it really opened my eyes to what modern fantasy could be. And I will say, every book that I've picked up from him I've at least had a good time with. I will say there's a couple that I didn't love, like Cytonic, I didn't love it, and Frugal Wizard, I didn't love. However, the number of books and pages that I have read from this man's writing, 2 books that I wasn't that big a fan of, is very, very minor. This man writes so much, and I just know that it's going to be a consistent, fun, and good time. Whenever I'm asked, who's your favorite author, what's your favorite book, what's your favorite book series, I always default back on Brandon Sanderson, particularly the Stormlight Archive. They just came at the perfect time for me, and I think a lot of people's favorite books of all time are very tied to when you pick them up. And Sanderson's Stormlight Archive and the Mistborn series as well, to be fair, just came along at the perfect time for me. It was something that I needed. And if I didn't pick up the Mistborn trilogy, I would not have started this channel. I would not have written my own book. I would not have become such a prolific reader? Busy reader? I definitely wouldn't be reading as much as I do now. To say that these books changed my life would be an understatement. They really are huge to me. And just the scope and the characters and the depth to the Cosmere is absolutely insane. I love the fact that it has all these interconnected worlds and all these characters, and even the magic is integrated. It's so interesting and well thought out. As a fantasy fan, there's so much to sink your teeth into with him as an author. And I challenge you to find anyone who doesn't love Kaladin as a character. He's just the best. Talking about authors that really changed my perspective on the genre, we have Matt Denon, the author of Dungeon Crawler Carl. I love these books so much. They're so good, and as soon as I finish them, I will be jumping back to his back catalogue of works, including Kaiju Battlefield Surgeon, which just sounds equally bizarre and amazing. He's another case, much like J. Kristoff, where the humour just really works for me. And I will say it's a completely different style of humour, but they equally work for me. But I've read so many really heavy fantasy books and lots of traumatic fantasy books, and lots of books that are just really, really theme heavy or idea heavy, and some of them can be a bit of a downer. But Matt Denon just reminded me that fantasy can also be a ton of fun. It really is just such a fun series to read. Whenever you've had a really long day, you want to just chill out, check in with Carl and Donut for a couple chapters, it's always going to be a good time, to the point where we could get an entire chapter of Donut brushing her teeth and I would be like, yes, just chill, I love this. It's so good. And also depth, I will say yes, it's a ton of fun, lots of funny and silly humor in it, but the level of depth that Carl gets as a character, he starts off as this sort of average Joe type person, but when you are thrown onto an alien survival TV game show with the last of humankind and you watch people slowly die around you, it's going to affect you as a person. And Carl really has become this very interesting character, and it's really deepened him as a person, particularly looking into this broader scale story of this political machinations of this company that owns this dungeon that they are in. Yes, it's a funny, silly, good time, but there's so much more to this story. It's just a perfect blend of serious, heavy depth to a story, but also this fun, light-hearted, silly moments as well. It's just a really good blend for me. So no matter what Denon releases next, I will be there day one. Next on up, we have Daniel Green. While I did enjoy these, I do think that Neon Ghost: A Witch's Sin was a huge step up in quality of his work. Neon Ghost: A Witch's Sin is such a cool book. There's so much to the world building that I absolutely love. It's this cyberpunk setting, but with vampires. I mean, do I need to explain any more? I did do a full video of reading through the book, so if you want to check that out, you can. If you want more in-depth thoughts than just me going, "Ooh, it's good." I'm a sucker for the cyberpunk setting, and I will say that the world building was a huge draw to this book for me. But the main character, Taya, has this very strong personality, I think was really, really well done as well. And hearing some of the things he said about the books that are coming up, with the perhaps a prequel novella that happens before A Witch's Sin, has me very excited. And also this court drama with goblins. Yes, these are such creative ideas and I love it. And while I do think there is something to be said about separating the art from the artist, I do think I sway more heavily to pick up the art if I do like the artist behind it. And Daniel's just a really nice guy. A a stand-up goblin. However, I don't want that to seem like it's detracting from the quality of his work. I do think that it's really been great to see this level up in his writing every release that he puts out, and I'm really looking forward to see what's next. Next on up, we have Fonda Lee. Now, what really draws me to Fonda Lee as an author is her care that she takes with her characters. We are following the Kahill family, and each character has so much to their personality and depth. Each one is really fleshed out, and even though you might not agree with all the choices that they do make, you can see how they as an individual came to that conclusion. And I do think it's quite impressive to have this entire cast of deep characters. It's not just one or two, it's the entire cast has their own life, and that affects how they make decisions and what they're doing and how they react to what comes up in this story. This already has a lot going on because it is a very political story. There's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of political maneuvering between these different clans, but it's also perfectly manageable and easy to follow. And Fonda Lee is not shy and not afraid to make some really heavy-hitting moments. She does lots of mean things to her characters. She isn't afraid to have her characters make very questionable decisions, and she isn't afraid to kill off her characters, so you never know what's going to come up next. But these books are traumatic, unpredictable, really deep characters. I will definitely be picking up any other books that Fonda Lee puts out, because I know that she will take the time and the care to really look into her characters and the story. Next up we have Ryan Kahill, the author of the Bound and the Broken series. Every book that I've read from him that he's put out has been better than the last one, and I'm so excited to read Of War and Ruin at some point this year. It's over 1,000 pages, but people say it's his best work yet, and I thought The Exile, which is the novella before that, was a 5 out of 5. So I'm very excited to read Of War and Ruin. Ryan's a really hard worker. He's been putting out some very chunky books in a short period of time. He's had a release every single year, and on top of the novellas, and the most up-to-date one is over 1,000 pages long. And it was on so many people's top 10 reads of the year. So if he keeps up this trajectory, I cannot wait to see what he does next. Have you ever read a book and just felt like it was written for you specifically? That's how I felt when I was reading The Ember Blade. This does everything that I love about fantasy. The prose style, oh, beautiful. Beautifully written prose. The perfect mix of lyrical and beautifully written without being overly metaphorical. I think the world building is fantastic, and the characters, oh boy, the characters. This is another case where there is a large cast of characters, but they're all very well developed. I think I love the humor in this book as well, with the character Grub in particular, Grub Club. So it hits on a lot of my favorite tropes and setups with the found family, the magic item. There's so much to love. It just felt like it was written for me. And while the Shadow Casket wasn't quite as good as Emberblade, I really enjoyed that as well. And then his other series is Upside Down. It's airships and steampunk pirates with heists. Sometimes an author's work just resonates really well with you, and Chris Wooding is definitely that author for me, or one of them. Fun fact, he's also a video game writer, so he writes for a lot of video games, most notably Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So on top of his books, if he's releasing a game, I will also be interested in checking that out. However, the one good thing about his novels is it's just him, whereas games usually have a large room of writers. So I need that third Darkwater Legacy book, and I will be picking up whatever he writes after as well. Next up we have, that was terrible, wasn't it? M.L. Huang with Sword of Kaigen. Now, I loved this book. I did a full spoiler-filled video on it, and M.L. Huang does an amazing job of really setting the atmosphere and tone to a book. With Sword of Kaigen, the setting and just the atmosphere that immediately was created in the first chapter, first page, was so impressive with the way that she writes. However, again, it's not overly metaphorical or even lyrical. It's very straightforward prose, but she just manages to create this world so quickly and so vividly that I was so impressed when reading Sword of Kaigen. And Sword of Kaigen really reads like a war epic. The way she delves into theme and character and how she interweaves all the different elements together is so impressive. It reminds me a lot of Sanderson. Their books are very, very different, but what Sanderson and Emma Huang do really well is the interweaving of all the different elements of a story. So if you're tying your characters, your themes, your settings all together, it makes for such a cohesive story and such an entertaining read. How the world building, the fantastical elements in the plot then tie into the ideas and the characters and their development is top notch. And the way she's able to cover these large topics and ideas but have it very grounded to her characters definitely makes her an auto-buy author in my eyes, and I cannot wait to pick up Blood Over Brighthaven, which is her newest release. And last but most certainly not least, we have Evan Winter, the author of The Burning, starting with Rage of Dragons and then the sequel Fires of Vengeance. Now this series is so much fun. This is an African-inspired fantasy series, and how Evan then uses this basis of this world building to tie to his characters and their development is something I really enjoyed. I don't want to get into it too much because it is kind of a spoiler, but I think Tao is such an interesting character to follow. Watching his development over the series, or between the two books, has been really, really fascinating, and there were some scenes in book 2 they got really heavy, very tightly structured. I think this is a very neat storytelling. There's very familiar sort of tropes and structures, but it's just executed so well and in such an interesting way that I couldn't put either of these books down. They were really fast reads. Despite the fact that they're not structured as particularly quick, I just wanted to keep reading and reading. How Evan is plotting the character arc for Tao and how much he changes between these two books is such an interesting journey to watch. I think we'll get a lot more from him in the future books, and it'll be really interesting to see how he then continues on with this very interesting arc for this character. But even just with these two books, it shows a really keen sense of character and story and world building. So I'll be there for when he finishes The Burning and whatever he does next. What was the last author that you read that you thought, this perfectly fits my particular taste and it feels like it's written for me? Be really interested to know. Let me know in the comments below. But thank you very much for watching. Outro.